Go with me to Joshua chapter 1. In planning this series, it was not lost on us that the Christmas time for many is so awesome. How many of you would just be honest and say, this is my favorite time of the year? Most wonderful time of the year? Okay. Yeah. I love it as well. I just love it when it's warm. If you can combine summer and Christmas, I'm in. That would be awesome. But awesome time of the year. Okay, some of you are going to be spending time with family that you actually like, which is good. Some of you, you got the crazy uncle that's like, oh, he's coming over again, but that's okay, right? You get to see people that you haven't seen for a while, people coming in. There's a lot of excitement around the time of the year. Some of you are just excited about presents. Hey, I'm hoping to get the car with the bow on it, right? People actually do that, apparently. And yet, it's not lost on us that for many, this time of the year brings with it some pain, some struggles. For some, it'll be the first year that you'll spend without someone that had always been there, or another year without that person that had always been there. For some of you, it's a new battle that you're facing, a new struggle in your life. And so this time of the year does bring with it a certain level of pain for some and struggle. And maybe some of you just right now are in a financial situation where the culture around you is saying buy, spend. And there's this pressure to say, I need to do this, but you're just struggling because you're saying, well, I just don't have the resources to do what the culture is telling me I should do. And so what's interesting is there's this dichotomy, because what the culture sits here and says is you need more of this, and what we want to come and say is you need more of this. So the culture says you need more presence, and we come along and say, no, what you need is the presence of Christ. How many of you have ever been in a fight before? Go ahead and raise your hand. You've been. Now, hold on. Let me qualify this, okay? Not one of those, or I'm talking the fists are up, right? Okay, how many of you? Yeah, it's okay, all right. That's okay. Some of you are lovers, not fighters. That's cool too. When I was in junior high, we were going on a bike ride through our neighborhood, in the summer, and there was a kid that we went to church with. His name was Michael. Michael was socially awkward. Okay, he had a hard time fitting in with kids his age and things like that, and it was kind of frustrating to some kids. And so we decided to pick Michael up and ask him if he wanted to go on a bike ride with us. So we go to Mike's house, we pick him up, and we're riding bikes, and we're riding past this one house, and there are three kids in the yard playing football. Pads, helmets, the whole gear. You ever have the neighborhood bully? How many of you you had the neighborhood bully? Or maybe you were the neighborhood bully. I don't know. Okay? I see Bruce up here nodding yeah, okay. So, these were the neighborhood bullies. They were twin brothers. Their names were Chip and Dale. I'm not kidding. I'm not making this up. With names like Chip and Dale, I guess you got to grow up fighting, okay? Especially once you hit junior high. Chip and Dale were the neighborhood bullies. So you've got socially awkward Mike encountering Chip and Dale, all right? There's conflict. So we ride by their house, and they stop Mike, and they start giving him a hard time. And so I step in, right? I'm going to deal with this, Chip and Dale. So I stepped in, I defended Mike, and we rode off. Okay? And, we said a few words as we were riding off. And we rode around the neighborhood, dropped Mike off at his house. We're riding back to my house, and we ride past Chip and Dale's house again, right? Well, they remember the encounter, and they weren't going to have it. So I ride past their house, and I look behind, and my younger brother, he's on his bike, pedaling, and they stop him. Actually, they divert him down another street. And he's like, oh no, I gotta go. Well, he went down a dead-end street. I'm like, oh no, this is gonna turn out bad. There's a battle about to happen. So I turn around, and I ride past Chippendale, and I go up to my brother, and my brother's like, it's a dead end, what do we do? I'm like, take my bike, because it's fast. Like, I had the fast bike. Take my bike and just ride fast and go past them, and we'll burn by these guys, we'll head home. My brother's definition of fast and my definition of fast were two different things. Like, 'cause he ran into Chippendale, boom, they stopped him. I'm like, oh no. So I got to defend my brother, right? Because plus my brother was on my bike, and they told him to get off my bike and give him their bike. Now they're wanting my bike, so I go up, and back in my unsanctified days, okay, I took Chip or Dale, one of them. Remember, full football gear, pads. I grabbed him. I threw him up against a fence. Nobody's touching my bike or my brother. I'm the only one who can touch my brother. All right, anyone else? You know how that goes, right? I kid you not. He came up swinging. Boom, popped me right in the eye. And it was on, you know what I mean? Like I was in the middle of a battle, and I got Chip here, I got Dale here, and they're standing here, the fists are up, they're ready to go, and I already got one in the eye. And so I'm like, okay, so in my mind I'm planning this out. I'm going to kick Chip, then I'm going to spin and punch Dale, and then I'm going to get my bike and we're out of here. Then out of the corner of my eye, I see their buddy. See there was a third? And he must have been like on the creatine, you know what I mean? He's a big guy. And he was wearing full football gear, and in each hand he had a football helmet. I'm like, oh no. I had a moment of sanity. Right before I was about to make my move, you know what I mean? I had a moment of, this is not going to turn out well for me. And so, being the mature young man that I was, and also scared, I'm in the middle of this fight, this battle that was about to go down, knowing I was about to lose because I got me and my brother. My brother wasn't much of a fighter, let's just be honest. He was small and younger, and he wasn't much of a fighter. And so I said, get on the bike, we're out of here. And they let us ride away. I might have said a few words about their mama as we were riding away, but they started chasing. Well, what I didn't tell you was this. My cousin was with us that whole time on the bike ride. You know how your cousin's supposed to have your back, right? Like your brother, you got your family, right? And your cousins, like they're supposed to like have your back. And when it came time and punches were thrown and we were in the middle of the battle, my cousin was nowhere to be found. He was like 2 blocks up, like watching, like, oh, is Doug about to get himself worked? And so when I needed the presence of my cousin to back me up and help me in the battle, where was he? Like, Matt, where were you? He's like, oh, I was too scared. I was watching. I'm like, I needed you. Like we rode away and we got out of it with just one, punch to the eye. But in the middle of the battle, I needed his presence. I needed his help, and he was gone. He was nowhere to be found. And the reality is this, okay? Life is marked by battles. It is. And people will let you down. Friends will let you down. Can I be real with you, church? The church will let you down. We will. But if there's one thing that you can be sure of, if there's one thing I want you to grasp and hold on to and leave with today, is that the presence of God will be with you in the midst of your battle, whatever it is. It may be a marriage that's really struggling right now. It may be a battle with your children and then straying from God, and there's just conflict there. Maybe another relational battle, like we find ourselves in these relational battles all the time. It may be a financial thing. It may be a sin issue that you're just wrestling with, and you want victory over, but you're having a hard time with it. And yet, there's the promise in Scripture that the presence of God is with you in the middle of the battle. He's not going to pull one of those things my cousin pulled on me, and you turn around, God is with you. And I know that sometimes it's difficult to see that. I get that. Like sometimes we ask ourselves, okay, God, where are you? Anyone ever asked that question to God? You can be honest. It's a safe place. Like, God, where are you right now? Because it doesn't look like you're here. Like, I've been there, and I'm wondering, okay, God, I don't see you. But God's promised that he's there. If you go to the book of Joshua, chapter 1. I want to show you today that God's presence in your battles, like his presence in your battle, guarantees your victory. Now, we're going to have to talk about what that victory looks like. But I want to show you how today that God promises his presence in your battle. And we know that because there's a man named Joshua. Now, how many of you remember our Exodus series from this past summer? Okay, hopefully most of you that were here. Israel had been released from the slavery of the Egyptians. They had been in the wilderness through circumstances of unbelief and disobedience and grumbling and complaining. Israel ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. What should have been a trip that could have taken as little as 12 days took 40 years. But Israel was on the brink of entering this land, this promised land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this place of renewed fellowship with God. Remember when we talked in the Exodus series, this land points us toward a place of renewed fellowship with God where we experience a relationship with God that is new and fresh and eternal. That's why the promise of the land to Abraham was an eternal possession. And so as they were about ready to cross the Jordan River, they were going to enter the land of Canaan, a land filled with giants, a land filled with powerful people. God was going to give this to them as an eternal possession. Now, what happened was Moses had died. And so Joshua, the new leader, was about to embark on the greatest battle of his life. He was on the brink of going into the single greatest battles. Like the next few months for him would be battle after battle after battle after battle as God was fulfilling his promise to deliver them this land. And so understanding that that's the setting, what do you think Joshua may have felt? I'm leading this nation into battle, not really known for their military prowess, you know what I mean? Israel had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. The previous generation had died off. This new generation had come forward. And so Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, it says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. So he gives them a command to go. I'm going to keep my promise. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I had promised to Moses. Now notice verse 4. From the wilderness of Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, toward the great sea, going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Here's the promise. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. So as Joshua was about ready to enter the land and engage in some pretty serious battles, God says, Joshua, as I was with Moses, my promise. Like the one thing I want you to know, Joshua, the one thing you need to know and feel and grasp as you enter the battle is that I am with you. Because Joshua, this battle's too big for you. It's too big for these people. If victory is going to be yours, it will come because I am with you. And so the one thing that God promised to Joshua, that he promised to this people, was that his presence would be there every single step of the way. And so what we need to realize and what we need to grasp is the road to heaven is marked by battles. So if we look at Joshua and the nation of Israel entering the land, we know that this land, these types and shadows of the Old Testament ultimately point to something greater. That this land in Canaan ultimately pointed to an eternal possession, a heavenly home. As the book of Hebrews says, that Abraham, being promised this land, looked for a city who has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. That they looked forward to an eternal possession that would be ultimately theirs for all of eternity. And that what we as men and women who know Jesus look forward to, like this isn't as good as it's going to get. I certainly hope not. Why? What we have is the promise that we have an eternal possession, an eternal land, a heavenly home. Like that's what we set our gaze upon. That's what we look to. But we're not there yet, are we? Like if you're here and you're breathing, you're not there. And if there's one thing I know about your life, is your battle is coming. I've said this to the teenagers as I was youth pastor for years and years. If you live long enough, eventually you're going to bleed. That life is marked by battles. Yes, there's good times. Yes, there's times of joy. But if you've lived long enough, you can remember the battles that you faced, the struggles that you went through, the times in which you needed to know and believe that God was with you, times where you were having a difficult time believing that God was with you. But in order for Israel, in order for Joshua to take possession of the land, to have that possession, what stood in the way? The enemy. And battling and fighting and struggling. And ultimately, the way and the path to rest was through the struggle, through the battle. And I wish I could stand up here today and say, if you follow Jesus, it'll be so easy. You'll never have any problems. You'll not have any battles. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. That if you follow Christ, like you say, like this is going to be the passion of my life, that I'm going to do this. Listen, from here to heaven, you're going to have battles. There's going to be times in which you're going to be overwhelmed. And the promise that God gave to Joshua is the same promise that he gives to us. If we look at verses 5 through 7, let's read it again. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. Like some of you need to be here today just to hear God say to you, I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. God's presence is here. It's like know it, believe it, claim it. Verse 6, be strong and courageous. Where does your strength and your courage come from to face the battles? Where does it come from? Certainly not you. Like we're weak, aren't we? Like how does someone face the battles of their life with the strength and the courage that they do? They face the battles knowing that their strength, that their courage comes not from themselves, but from a God who loves them, but from the presence of God who is with them. So the basis of Joshua's courage, the basis of Joshua's, he says, strength. So he says, be strong, be courageous. The basis for both of those things is what? The presence of God. Moses or Joshua, I will be with you. So based on that, be strong, be courageous. Don't waver. Don't back down. Don't be a coward. Like how many of us at the end of the day, we want to be a coward. We want to back down and we want to stray from doing the right thing. But God says, I'm with you. I won't forsake you. And based on that, please be strong. Please be courageous. For you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give to them. And verse 7, he repeats it again. Only be strong and very courageous. Only be strong and courageous. Like sometimes it's hard to be strong. Sometimes it's hard to have courage. Therefore, that courage and that strength has to come from somewhere outside of us. It has to come from God in your relationship through Christ. Because in Christ, he has promised just as he promised to Joshua, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Third thing we see is that God's presence is experienced most fully in your obedience. Like, what we want to do is we want to say, okay, God, give me your presence apart from obedience. Like, where is God? What's he doing? I don't see God working in my life. I don't see God doing anything. And yet we're living lives out of the will of God. We're living lives outside of obedience to God. Like, we want to live our lives the way we want to, and then we want to expect God's presence to be there to carry us through battles. But notice what God says to Joshua. I will be with you. I will not forsake you. Be strong and courageous. Verse 7. But in your strength and courage and in my presence, do what? Being careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? So the presence of God, like, you want to experience, so you want to know that God's there. He's promised to be there. You want to now experience fully the presence of God and the power that comes through knowing that God's with you. It comes through a life of obedience. And this is what God is reminding Joshua of. Joshua, be very, very careful to follow me. Don't do it your way, Joshua. Don't do it your way. Keep my law that I gave to Moses. Joshua, obey me by faith and through love every day. Obey me. What do the scriptures say? Like, study it, know it, believe it. Like, sit under the teaching of the word. A lot of people want to know where the presence of God is, but they're never sitting under the teaching of God's word. Like, you will experience the presence of God as his word is ministered to you. This is why what we do on a Sunday morning is not insignificant. This is huge. This is important for your life, for your growth. You want to know this presence of God. You want to experience it. It comes through your obedience. God, what does your word say? How do I live it out? How do I accomplish the task that you're giving me through your word? And in that, you will begin to know and understand the presence of God at levels you've never experienced. But people who want to kind of sit on the sidelines, and yet they want the presence of God apart from obedience, end up wondering where God is at. And this is what God is reminding Joshua of. Only be careful. I will be with you, but be careful, Joshua. Don't stray. Obey. Don't do it your way, do it my way. And a lot of people are doing it their way, and it leads to frustration. And it leads to them saying, God, where are you? And God's saying, I'm here. I want you to obey. And in your obedience, you will experience my presence. And fourthly, in the battle, what are the two things? What are the two things that we struggle with? Fear and discouragement, right? Man, it's like, you know what God wants you to do. And sometimes there's a lot of fear in that. Like, if I obey, what if this happens? Like, I'll be honest with you. I've wrestled with that. Like, if I do the right thing, what will it cost me? Like, obedience sometimes has a price tag to it, doesn't it? And so there's fear that says, if I obey, what's going to happen? When battles come, big time discouragement comes, don't they? Like, some of you came in this morning and you're discouraged. Like, you're just discouraged because the battles keep coming one after another after another. Or you're in a battle that kind of is overshadowing and clouding everything else, and it brings discouragement. And God knows that. That's why he tells Joshua, be strong in verse 9 and courageous. He's repeating the strength and the courage, right? Be strong and courageous. You can be through God's presence. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed. Like, God knows that fear and discouragement come in the midst of battles, doesn't he? Does God know that? I mean, you only have to look to the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus knelt before the greatest battle that he would ever wage, and we're going to get there, and prayed, God, if this cup can pass from me, let it pass, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Like, you think there was some discouragement there, some fear there? Like, do you think God gets it? So God says, Joshua, I know you're going to be tempted to be afraid, and I know you're going to be tempted to be discouraged, but don't be. Why? Why should Joshua not be afraid? Why should Joshua not be discouraged? What does the end of the verse say? For the Lord your God is what? Say it again. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So fear and discouragement can be diminished when we know that God is with us. That's why I've said this before. If you knew that God was with you and you believed that He was with you, what would you do? Like, if you had the absolute confidence that God was with you, what would you do? Find out what that is and do it. And knowing that the presence of God is with you, and knowing that He won't forsake you, and knowing that He won't leave you, what happens? We become strong. We become courageous. Fear and discouragement begin to fade. In the presence of God, you can find strength and courage. That knowing that the presence of God is with you changes everything. Second thing we see from our text here, and we're going to jump actually to chapter 5, because the narrative here kind of keeps on going, but it's an interesting story in chapter 5, because I think what God's displaying here, and you'll see it throughout a lot of the narratives in the Old Testament, particularly the battle narratives, is that God's presence is gloriously displayed in what? In your weakness. Like, you wrestle with the fact that you know you're weak, right? You wrestle with the fact that you know, man, I can't handle this on my own. Like, you ever been there? It's like, God, I can't handle this. How many of you have ever heard a preacher get up and say, God will never give you anything greater than you can handle? That's a lie. God gives us stuff more than we can handle all the time. He does. Like, I've sat there and heard preachers say that and said, that's just not true. Like, I've experienced stuff that I'm like, God, I can't handle this. And I realize my weakness. And the reason God, listen, pay attention, church. The reason God allows you to deal with battles that are too big for you to handle is to show you that He's big enough in spite of your weakness, so that His presence and His power is gloriously displayed through your weakness. Chapter 5, begin reading verse 1. It says, as soon as the kings of the Ammonites were beyond the Jordan to the west. Now, Israel had crossed the Jordan. They were about ready to take on the city of Jericho. The Canaanites were afraid. The people of the land of Canaan were afraid because they had heard about what God had done with the Israelites. So they crossed the Jordan. God parted the Jordan, just like He had done at the Red Sea. He parted the Jordan. They walked through. It says, as soon as the kings of the Amorites were beyond the Jordan to the west, all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they had crossed over. It says their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. Now notice what God says to do. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. Make flint knives out of flintstone, and I want you to go through, and all the men, I want you to circumcise them. Now, if you don't remember the story from our Exodus series, circumcision for the male members of Israel was a sign of the covenant. That was a sign that they were in the covenantal relationship with God. The circumcision ultimately points to what Christ would do when He cuts away our old hearts and gives us a new heart. Paul calls it a circumcision of the heart in the book of Romans. So circumcision, we know, was incredibly important to God, okay? There was a cutting away. Right? There was bleeding. There was all of these things that happened. We're like, why are we talking about like Doug, another circumcision? It's like, it's in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament everywhere. In fact, he goes through, let me just read. It says, Joshua had to circumcise them, all the males of Egypt. He circumcised the ones that came out of Egypt, but this generation had not been circumcised. Verse 6, for the people of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, the men of war came out of Egypt, perished because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. Verse 7, so it was their children whom he raised up in their place that Joshua circumcised. They were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. So circumcision, we know, was incredibly important to God. This was the sign of the covenant, that this people is mine, and that we are in this covenantal relationship. And because of what circumcision points to in the gospel, it was so important that God command them to have this done. And I can't imagine it wasn't awkward. You know? It's like you had upwards to maybe 100,000 men. You know, it's like, you know, Moses or Joshua's there, and he's got his crew, and they're hey guys, we're going to go for a walk, all right? This is going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt me. So, so they actually call the place Gibeath Haraloth, which means hill of the foreskins. But then they call it Gilgal. Verse 8. When the circumcising of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I've rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. And so this day, the name of the place is Gilgal, which in the Hebrew means to roll, because God had rolled away the reproach and you're ready to move forward. So right before battle, God asked Joshua to do something strange. He asked them to cut away, and that symbolically cut away the reproach, identifying them as the people of God. But in doing that, it reveals and creates what? Like if I'm going to take my mightiest men into battle, guess what I'm not going to do right before battle? I'm not going to circumcise them. Right? There's pain. There's weakness. But what you'll see throughout the Old Testament in particular is this. This is God's battle, not Israel's. When God came to Gideon, and Gideon had his thousands of men, what did God say to him? You have too many, Gideon. Gideon lost to 10,000. God said, Gideon, you still have too many. God sent Gideon into battle with how many men? 300, to take on thousands. And you see this pattern in the Old Testament battles over and over and over. That there is weakness on the part of his children. There is weakness amongst the men that are supposed to go into battle. And in that weakness, what God does is he says, I will win the battle. I will use you in your weakness. But what you will see is at the end of the day that this battle is not won by men, but this battle is won by God. And what happens in our battles, and what happens is this recognition that we're weak and that we need a God who is bigger than us. And so when God brings you to the point of your inadequacy, it is then that you realize he is more than adequate. And that's the place we all have to get if we're going to see victory in our battles, if we're going to remain faithful, because that victory in our battle, that victory, because God guarantees victory, doesn't he? God guarantees that you will be victorious. But what does that victory look like? All of your circumstances change? That everything just becomes candy canes and lollipops and we're just having... No. What that victory looks like is this: a faithfulness to a God who is always faithful to you. So that someone who gets to the age of 60, 70, 80 years of old, facing battle after battle after battle, remains faithful, you look at them as a young person and say, how did you get there? And it has everything to do with the fact that God was present. And he used their weakness to keep them focused on his strength. So when you're weak and you focus on his strength, you become strong and you become courageous, and fear and discouragement are diminished, and there's faithfulness. And so those of you that know the story, you know that God sends them to circle the city of Jericho. Jericho was a strategic city, not a large city, but militarily speaking strategic. If you couldn't get past Jericho, you couldn't get into the land. It was a walled city. And so what does God tell him to do? He says, verse 3 of chapter 6, "You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout. And the city and the wall will fall down flat, and the people shall go up every one straight before him." So Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up what?" What did he say to take up? The ark. Why the ark? "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark." And he said to the people, "Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before what? Before the what? The ark of the Lord." Verse 12, "Then Joshua rose up early in the morning, and the priests took up what? What was present with them when they marched around the city? Every single time, what was present? The ark of the covenant. Why was that significant? Why not the men with their swords, their shields, their armor? Like, wouldn't that instill fear into the people of Jericho? Wouldn't that? And they were certainly there. But in the middle, there were soldiers. There were soldiers in the middle. What was there? The Ark of the Covenant. Why? Why was that so significant? Why was that so important? Because the Ark of the Covenant represented what? The presence of God. That God is here, and this is God's battle, so that when those people looked down, they saw the ark of God. They weren't scared about the soldiers. They were scared about the presence of God. And the thing that delivered Israel that day and gave them victory in Jericho was the presence of God. That the Ark of the Covenant, that symbolic representation of the fact that God was with them, gave them the victory. Now here's the last point, and we'll close with this. The greatest battle for you was waged 2,000 years ago on a cross when Jesus himself hung and bore your sin. So that why? You could have victory over sin, so that we could experience victory over death. And what happened 3 days later? In the grave, Jesus rose as a victor over sin. He rose as a victor over death, so that men and women who are crushed by sin, who are defeated by the weight of their sin and broken by sin, can experience victory through the presence of God because of what Jesus did on a cross 2,000 years ago. So that if you're sitting here today and you are embattled with sin and brokenness and life is not working out the way you thought and you need hope, there is hope, because the battle for your soul has already been waged and won, and the presence of God is yours if you want it. You just got to receive it. And so I'm going to pray. And as we close this service, we're going to sing one song. This song gives us the promise that He is faithful in the midst of our battle. And I want you to think about the fact that God is present in the midst of your battles. Father, I thank you. I thank you that you have promised through the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus that you will never leave us. The promise you gave to Joshua is the promise that you give to your church today, that you will never leave us. You will never forsake us. That as big as the battles are, God, we are inadequate, but God, help us to realize today that you are more than adequate. Help us to realize as we lift our voices to you that you are faithful. That God, you are a covenant-keeping God. And so, Lord, be near to us. Reveal to us your presence. And allow your Spirit to give us eyes to see and ears to hear. And for any that might be here today that are struggling with sin and where they stand with you, I pray that now they would know that they can come to you, that they can pray even now and ask you, Father, for forgiveness based on Jesus and what he did. And they can become your child and know and experience your presence like they never have. In your name we pray. Amen.